what is for you a democracy?
Democracy, which was the one embraced by the people who actually wrote the Constitution of the U.S. When I want to annoy American intellectuals, I always like to point out that nowhere in the Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution does it say anything about America being a democracy. In fact, the people who wrote those documents were quite explicit that they hated democracy, they considered it the worst form of government, and that the form of government they were developing was designed to defend against the threat of democracy, as they put it. In fact, if you read the speeches that were made at the Constitutional Convention, the very first speech was a protege of George Washington, governor of Virginia, who began by saying, you know, we have a problem here in America. There's a real danger that democracy might break out. You know, the threat of democracy is something we can't ignore. And at that time, democracy and anarchy were used almost interchangeably as meaning, you know, lack of any sort of permanent structures of coercive government, direct democracy as we'd call it now, popular self-governance. And even the idea of representative democracy which Tom Paine introduced, was not really considered democracy. What they thought of was they were creating a republic, which was quite explicitly modeled on Polybius's idea of what the Roman Constitution was like, combining the perfect balance of monarchical, oligarchic, and democratic elements. So the Senate was going to be the aristocracy, the president was going to be the monarch, and the Congress would have limited powers over finance, and that was the democratic element. And you know, they were quite explicit about it. This is a republic, not a democracy, and conservatives in America will still say that. You know, they're honest about these things. Meanwhile, what happened was in the 1830s, there's a Canadian anarchist scholar named Francis Dupuy-Derry who's written about this, that you know, in France it was quite the same. After the revolution, they were all explicitly anti-democratic. Until the 1830s, something happened. Essentially, the franchise was widened enough that a bunch of politicians started calling themselves Democrats. And it was almost a term of provocation, sort of the way you'd say queer or something like that. Yeah, I am a Democrat, what's it to you? And they started winning elections. So within a decade, everybody started like calling themselves Democrats. And what were originally created as republics, which were anti-democratic, were relabeled democracy. Okay. So you have this completely contradictory situation. The way I always point out is, well, if you look at America, you know, everybody likes the idea of democracy. If ordinary people in America, you know, they're very pro-democratic. But everybody, you know, loves democracy, hates politicians, and is a little dubious about the very idea of government. So obviously, if democracy just meant electing politicians to run a government, that would make no sense. So there's some notion of democracy as self-governance there, even though people can't quite articulate what it would really mean.
Okay, so true democracy is like direct democracy, if I understand.
Yeah, it's a principle of self-governance and autonomy.